Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Endace Packet Forensic Files with your host, Michael Morris. This episode's very special guest is our very own Stephen Donnelly, CTO here at Endace. Stephen, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, hi, Michael. So I'm CTO at Endace. I've been here since we were founded in 2001. And my background is very much in packet capture and also timing in packet networks.
Now, I certainly appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule, Stephen, to be on our podcast series. And as you know, the goal of this series is really to share some industry expertise with our listeners and our customers and partners. So what I wanted to get into today is I've been hearing a lot about this kind of a rumor, more of a story about how cloud infrastructures don't have network packets. And obviously we know that's incorrect, but where does it come from? And is there any element of truth to it?
Yeah, that's a good one. So there's certainly an anecdote that I've heard, and it may well be apocryphal. So I haven't been able to find any original sources for it. But it's basically the story is that an executive is asked about what are you doing about packet capture in cloud, and the executive's response is cloud doesn't have packets. Which is quite funny, right? And it's a bit of a joke about, I think, executives who are pushing organizations into cloud, but don't necessarily understand the technology at all, right? They don't know what they're getting into. But I think there's another undercurrent there as well, which is around the fact that in cloud, networking is so abstracted that we don't even think about networking and packets in the same way that we would on-prem. And of course, communicating with cloud, it's all over the network, right? Regardless of whether it's through the public internet or not, everything is packet-based. So yeah, there are certainly packets in cloud.
No, absolutely. I shared with you my recent experience being at AWS reInvent this past fall. There's very little talk about network monitoring. It's all around data integrity, application performance, things like that. So I definitely can see where that rumor or concept has come from. So let's talk about few reasons to capture packet data in both traditional on-prem infrastructures as well as cloud environments. Why is it so important?
Yeah, sure. So when you think about why you capture packets in an on-prem network, there's kind of two major categories, if you like, that I see anyway. One of them is network operations. And in physical networks, you're looking for solving problems to do with reachability often. So it's simply, like the system is down, the network is down, the network is slow. What's the performance? Is my video call going through okay or not? That kind of thing. And often the networking team will look at the packets to try and resolve those problems. And the second part of it is security, right? So SecOps. And there's a whole acronym soup of things that we do in our on-prem networks. There's MDR, IDS, data leakage prevention, incident response. One of my favorite new acronyms is DEATH, which is detection, engineering, and threat hunting.
Okay.
So that's kind of the more proactive side of network security. And of course, there's compliance as well, right? Which is a new area that's really starting to come in. And I think that we sort of think of all of those things naturally in our on-prem networks, but all of those things still apply in cloud.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad you explained the death one. I just heard that for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, whoever came up with that acronym's got some security concern issues, right? So, are there specific risks or challenges for security teams that they face in cloud environments where packet data is so crucial?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of it is about visibility. So in our on-prem networks, we kind of have a wealth of experience in collecting evidence from the network. We have these tools and appliances and software packages and things. Cloud being so abstract and so remote from us, I think often we don't have the same kind of visibilities. So many of those threats that exist on-prem are still there. for cloud networks, but that lack of kind of visibility and control. So it's really important that security is a stakeholder in when you're doing cloud transitions, and I think that's perhaps the biggest issue today.
No, I think that's a great point. And things I've heard from customers too is there's still a lot of separation between the network team, the security team, and now the cloud infrastructure team, right? So, and they all have different expertises. So I think you're spot on there. What are the methods to capture packets in cloud environments? Because they're very different depending on which cloud provider you're using, right?
Yeah, that's right. There are some differences both between different cloud providers, cloud service providers, and from what we used to in our traditional on-prem networks. So if I'm in an on-prem network, I want to capture some traffic, I can log into a switch and I can set up a port mirror and I can just capture that traffic. I can send it to whatever tool set that I have that I like. And that's pretty straightforward. But when you're in cloud, you don't have access to that infrastructure. You can't log into a switch in AWS. So how do you go about actually getting access to the network traffic? And the good news is that there are a variety of ways of doing it. So most cloud service providers have some kind of port mirroring service available. So you can say, okay, I want to nominate one or more of these machines, virtual machines or containers, and I want to collect the traffic from those and send them off to, my collector or my tool set. But there are a lot of caveats around those services, and there are differences between different providers. The second way you might do things on-prem would be with a packet broker, network packet broker. And there are kind of the equivalent of those in clouds. Most of the same vendors are there. Sometimes they're called cloud packet brokers. And very frequently, these are based on agents. So the idea is that you install a small piece of software into each of the machines that you want to monitor, and they capture that traffic effectively locally on your virtual machines, and then they send a copy of it off to a central collection point. And again, there are advantages and disadvantages with that. You are using some of the CPU from your virtual machine to do that. You're using some of its network bandwidth, sort of double sending all of your traffic, right?
Right.
But there are some advantages, like you may be able to do something like Gigamod's precryption, where you can actually look at the traffic before it gets encrypted on the host, which can provide better visibility than you would get straight from the network.
Okay.
And then the final kind of approach in the cloud for getting access to packets is by sending it through an additional device. So think about a firewall or a router.
Okay.
Put that in line and with your traffic that you're going to and from the internet, say, or a gateway, and then set up a mirror on that device and have that send the traffic. And again, part of the problem there is that a lot of the products that we used to on-prem with firewalls, they're available in cloud, but they may or may not actually support the same feature set that they have on-prem. So you really need to do your research there, talk to your vendors, and see what the options are.
And I'm guessing the performance might not be the same as some of their physical appliances as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
So cloud gives us this fantastic scalability, but the individual point solutions may not work the same way or have the same performance.
Right. No, excellent point. So, hey, what are some challenges and considerations for cloud packet capture?
Well, so I think performance, as you mentioned, is one of them for sure. Individual devices like firewalls may have performance limits that are different to what they are on-prem. We used to switches forwarding always at whatever the line rate is. So that's part of it. There are a lot of caveats around traffic mirroring services in clouds. So not all service providers actually have that. So at least as of today, right, 2024, Microsoft Azure doesn't have a traffic mirroring service that's available, which is kind of unusual. Even where they are available, frequently there are limits. So there may only be certain types of virtual machines you can capture traffic from, for example, or you can capture traffic from a virtual machine, but not from a load balancer or some of the other types of infrastructure in cloud.
No, that's a great point. And it's, I mean, I'm sure there's other differences too, and cost structures that are different in some of those cloud providers as well. So lots
Absolutely.
lots
Yeah.
for IT teams to consider there, right?
Nothing in cloud is free. There's always a charge for anything,
Right.
regardless of whether it's a service or it's it's a switch or it's storage. So you do have to take those into account as part of TCO.
Okay. Are there network architecture differences in cloud environments that need to be considered when thinking about monitoring and capturing network traffic?
Yeah, that's true. I think that there are a variety of different sort of cloud patterns, right, or architectures,
Okay.
the way that organizations translate their internal structure when they move to cloud, right? So multinational companies are active in multiple regions. You may have separate business units with their own cloud teams and their own security teams. So you can end up with a very distributed kind of network, and it's not always clear who's responsible for what. So looking at architectures where your security is either in a centralized kind of mode, where you funnel everything through a dedicated security tool, VPC, for example, or whether
Okay.
it's more distributed and every business unit is dealing with things by themselves. And then again, charges can come into it. So if you're having a centralized model, you're pulling everything back to a central location, you may have to pay more for backhauling all of that traffic. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both.
Interesting. And I imagine, different organizations architect differently, taking into account those regions and transit gateway charges and things like that you mentioned. So I could see that there may be some duplicity in some architectures, right, to account for global organizations.
Absolutely. So, the great thing about cloud is it's easy to scale out,
Right.
but at the same time, that can lead to network sprawl, and you can end up having dusty corners of your cloud architecture that
Right.
nobody remembers where they
Right.
were built, and nobody is responsible for them, right?
Right up until they see the charges, right? So
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody's
because
getting the bill always.
somebody's getting the bill, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier, not hearing a lot about the network piece at AWS reInvent this past fall. It was really all around the applications and data management. Are there challenges or keys to capturing packet data to understand application performance and security? And are there recommendations that can be learned from traditional network monitoring and capture approaches?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I think a lot of it is about focus. And I recall I was at a security training event, and they had a stream specifically about cloud security for the whole day, and they didn't mention packets at all during that time, right? The
Okay.
focus is on APIs, and it's around logging and configuration and whole lots of really important things. But traditional kind of NDR didn't really come into it. So I think it makes sense to consider those approaches that we use on-prem and make use of that experience that we have, and recognize that the network provides a kind of independent view of or train of evidence of what's happening on the network.
Mm-hmm. So, Stephen, what's the importance of having packet capture in the cloud, in cloud environments? Is it basically the same as on-prem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've touched on some of that, and I think
Yeah.
the answer is yes. I see that
Right.
cloud is just as vulnerable to many of these kinds of problems and threats as our on-prem environments, and that the focus hasn't been there because of the novelty of it and the fact that we kind of subconsciously maybe we kind of outsource the networking to our cloud provider, and so we're not thinking about it. But I think it is really critically important, and all of those reasons for debugging network issues, security, visibility, and compliance are still there in cloud and should really be a focus.
No, absolutely. And I think you also hit on it earlier, the fluidity of the perimeter, right?
Mm-hmm.
As applications and instances are turning up and down, it's no longer a defined wall of where the edge is, right? There's new edges, larger edges, unique edges. I'm not sure what the right word is, but I like the word fluidity, and I think you definitely explained a lot of that in some of your earlier answers. So, Stephen, again, really appreciate your time in this. One thing I always like to ask our expert guests is really kind of put on your prognosticator hat. And what's one thing, especially when we're talking about cloud or hybrid cloud environments, what's one thing you'd recommend our listeners to really think about or be on the lookout for over the next 6 to 18 months in the ever-shifting battle for cyber and network security?
Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it? Prognostication. I think we can definitely expect to see more breaches in cloud. I think we're going to see more data theft. And there are plenty of statistics around the fact that a huge fraction of the attacks that corporates and enterprises are seeing is via cloud. So what I would like to see, I think, is a little bit more focus on NDR in cloud environments. So I think people need to take some of that hard-fought, hard-won experience from their on-prem security teams and start applying that to cloud. I think that's really critical.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And having us work with so many of the NDR vendors, I definitely see a large focus for those groups as well. So, Stephen, thank you for taking some of your critical time for joining our podcast and sharing some tremendous insights on how to better secure networks. We'd ask our listeners to tune in next time for another edition of the Endace Packet Forensic Files. For more information about Endace's network packet capture platform and our cloud solutions as well, please go to endace.com. Stephen, again, thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.